introduction will be very casual, because I think most everyone here knows both of these gentlemen. Clint Willour is the curator of the Galveston Art Center, where he has made a silk purse out of sow's ear. And he started how many years ago?
25.
25 years ago, he's been at the Galveston Art Center. But before that, he was an art dealer. And he said, enough of this foolishness, and got out. But he gave Ben Woitena his very first show, right?
It's true. It's true.
At Watson Denage Gallery.
Tibor Denage Gallery, Texas Inc.
Tibor Denage Gallery,
Gallery,
Texas Inc. Oh, I'm sorry. It was later called Watson Denage Gallery first. Then it was called,
Watson
I know, the Watson Gallery. Anyway, that's just a little bit of why Clint is here. Because I thought he knew Ben pretty well, the Watson Gallery. Anyway, that's just a little bit of why Clint is here. Because I thought he knew Ben pretty well, knew his career pretty well, and could tell you all of the things that Ben doesn't want us to know.
Oh, no, we're not going there.
Not going there.
That was very in the audience.
Yeah, there are stories you can't tell.
And Ben, of course, was, yeah, you have to, I'm sorry, you have to get around the sculpture so you can see. And Ben, of course, decided he did not want to be a part of the gallery about 30 years ago.
1981.
About 30 years ago. 35 years ago.
Who's counting?
But I was counting. And he devoted his creative life to commissions and to museum exhibitions and worrying Joan and driving her crazy.
Being conservator.
It's been wonderful.
Right?
Well, what do you do with a
Well,
19-year-old?
That's true. That's true.
Eternally.
Anyway, I've known Ben a long time, Ben and Joan both, and I finally just kind of said, Ben, it's time. And I beat him over the head with a hammer. And he said, let's do it. And this is what you see. This is the product. And I'm very excited about it. I think it's probably one of the best shows I've ever seen of Ben's. And the work, the body of work is, there's so much diversity in Ben's talent. He works in so many different media, and he works in each of them equally well. And I'm really honored that he decided to come back to the commercial world with us. And that's it. The rest is up to
There goes the talk.
That had to relate to that specific mark.
And then you came, and Greenberg came along and said,
Yeah.
you have to make it into the canvas. You have to make it part of the canvas. So Ellen Frankenthaler made the first stained painting, which actually showed at Tibor Denage Gallery in New York, called Mountains and Sea, which is now permanently on view at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. She was staining directly in the canvas, not chiseling, not doing any preparation. We're all concerned that what the longevity of those is that they've stood up now for 60 or 70 years.
But what they considered was that each approach to whether it was a painting or a sculpture was an event, where there was an extreme concentration on materials and process. And, the biggest problem was knowing when to quit.
Right. And other changes happened, which I think significantly changed the art world. The first was plastic paint, acrylic paint. nobody was using oil that much that often. And then they started, in the case of Larry Poons and Morris Lewis, they started pouring it on the canvas. I mean, Larry Poons used to have them running down the wall, and then he'd go on the floor and he'd play basketball in his studio on top of it, because they were plastic, didn't hurt him. And so there was that material change. And then with sculpture, Cortam came along, so it naturally rusted,
Supposedly, yeah, thank God that's no
Right,
longer
and
the
then
case.
David Smith issues where he was doing buffed stainless steel outdoor, and then Clint Greenberg, after David died, decided that David intended to paint them.
Right.
So he started painting David Smiths that probably never would have.
Where you correct.
So there was a lot of intervention, a lot of experimentation, a lot of. I think the art world at that time was so small that in New York City, if you went to the Cedar Tavern in Lower Manhattan, you ran into almost every, with the exception of women, almost every major painter and sculptor in the city of New York, which was at that point had taken over from Paris as the center of the art world, and it was a handful of people.
Well, that's true too. And Philip Pavia put together the club and also the magazine It Is. And Pavia came to Texas. Pavia, Slivka, and Rosati. Umhoff was out for a year.
Okay.
And so I got to know those guys, and especially Slivka. And Pavia too, because Pavia was a carver. And to kind of go back a little bit to where I was at UT was, we were doing 9 hours a week modeling from the figure with Umhoff.
That's how Farrah Fawcett got her start.
Well, for one semester.
For one semester.
She actually got a higher grade than I did.
I'm sure she did.
Yes,
But she worked very hard for
yeah,
it.
well, like I said, there's really stories you can't just, anyway, anyway, you can put abstract expressionism and carving together, believe it or not. Because just like that one mark on the canvas, if you take a raw piece of field stone and you take a point to that surface, that's the same mark. That's the beginning of that. You don't have to preconceive the image, which I don't do for any of this. Okay, so I've kept the process. Okay, you know, it's like this piece here started with the circle.
Right.
Okay, where am I going from there? Okay,
Which you rarely had used before. You've used parts of it, you've used arcs,
yeah.
other things, but you never, that I can remember, ever used a full circle, complete full circle.
There was one. It was called Vegas.
Okay.
Okay.
Which I must not have seen.
Yes, you did.
Did I? 40 years ago.
You want to start?
Yeah, sure.
It's the same circle.
It is. Well, it didn't work then, but it works
No,
now.
that works out. That's
And
why.
I probably knew it didn't
Yeah,
work.
that's why the part that didn't work is no longer in existence. Okay, so I mean, you know, yeah, and
Now, was Southern Cal a big influence, or just a sort of minor blip in your?
okay, I went from one carver to another,
Okay.
and that was Hal Gebhardt, and the carving experience for me, I still carve today. The pieces aren't in this show. I did show them in West Texas with this exhibition that I had this summer at the various 5 museums. The thing about abstract expressionism, Snobble referenced this in an article quite recently. He said paintings based on freedom. Okay, he's in, there's no repetition or serial work here. With this approach that we've just briefly described, no two images are ever going to match up, and I'm never going to. I may go into series, but probably no more than 4 or 5 pieces, and because after that it becomes repetitive, and I no longer have an interest in it. Because with each situation, it's always a new experience, it's a new problem to solve. So if you're continually in that state of experiments and solutions.
The other interesting aspect for me was we showed your drawings. Usually showed them separately in a smaller room, not in reference to the sculpture, because the drawings really didn't have a direct reference, perhaps color sometimes. And I just looked at the piece. I gave one of your drawings to the Museum of Fine Arts when Sumo and Pittman started in the Prints and Drawings department, a concentration on drawings by sculptors. And I had bought that piece early on from you, and I thought, well, here's a drawing by a sculptor. And when I presented it to the committee, they said, but it doesn't really reference a sculpture. And I said, it's a drawing by a sculptor. It doesn't say it's a drawing of a sculpture, it says it's a drawing by a sculpture. And those primarily were brightly colored, and they were abstracted almost completely. But they were beautiful, beautiful drawings. So I always found it interesting. The closest we come now is to these wall-mounted pieces, which reference forms. They reference the diamond, they reference some of the organic forms, but there's almost no color in these at all.
Well,
So,
varies. Okay. I mean, try to solve the black painting sometime.
Frank Stella tried it, did very well, or very early on. Beyond
And,
that, it's been
okay, yeah, well,
difficult.
there's no reference to the frame here, but and this happens to be on plexiglass. And the one around the corner is also. Again, it's a material reference that relates problematically to sculpture.
I love that pairing over there with the two diamonds,
Right.
one wall mounted and the other one casting its shadow on the wall. So you see that direct reference to the flatness and the three-dimensionality.
And then if you get into bringing in extraneous materials, as Picasso did early on, and in terms of his wallpaper or paper sculptures and stuff, and then you begin to apply string to the surface as a linear element. And, the title always comes last, so that becomes string theory, which I know absolutely nothing about.
I'm not sure.
It's a great title. And I can reference the cosmos with very abstract. But what I believe in the process is whenever you start something, do something that's so extreme.
Right.
A painter works this way. They'll lay in the ground. They'll probably premeditate a little bit into an image, and then they'll come in on top of that. I believe in coming in with the surface first, and then working around that, going back to the ground. And
Well, and speaking of that process, since you don't give very look, I've never seen an actual drawing for a sculpture. Do they just draw organically?
yeah, no freeze. I don't draw for sculpture. I get bored easily. Okay, if I draw for sculpture, I'm producing craft. Try and draw this in the round anyway. The interesting thing about the figure background too is that the figure's always in the round. Okay, I taught at Glass Hill for 27 years, and I taught the figure part of that teaching experience. And the interesting thing about the figure is that, okay, you put 15 people in the room, and they're all different. You can always tell who has flat eyes and been watching too much TV or the internet or whatever, because there's no in-the-round experience. That's an educational experience, okay? And for me, it's always been the foundation, and because figure initially was always associated with architecture. I mean, you go back to the Egyptians, everything slammed up into a niche, and the Indians, the same way with their temples, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing is that historically, gradually, it began to be lifted off the wall, placed in the round, and then you have the Renaissance with Michelangelo, et cetera, and then you bring that forward into objects that then sit on points, and you get Calder, and then you get Mondrian doing this very static Bauhaus, very controlled thing, and then you take Calder up here, and he takes all those same color patterns and he begins to spin them. So that's basically the whole progression of sculpture. And then that gets even more complex because you're dealing with indirect and direct processes. Steel's very direct, casting's very indirect. So you begin to combine.
Which brings me to another aspect of your career, which when I went to Galveston, I was approached by the Waco Art Center to take an exhibition which they were hoping to travel, and I said, I said, who is it? And they said, well, Hamilton. And I said, oh, well, let me see some images. And all of a sudden I saw these images of work that was made out of wood, that was not anything like anything I'd ever seen from you before. And I took that show. And I think that's one of the strangest sort of morphing of an idea into a result. So you want to talk a little bit about the factory and the gift of those forms to you, and then your interpretation. You have a better way of explaining it than I do. So there was a factory in Waco that had gone out of business.
Okay, Walworth.
Walworth.
Right.
And they had these sand-cast wooden forms they used for drilling oil.
They were valve forms.
Right.
Okay, that were sitting out in the oil fields. At that time, incredibly beautifully made by hand.
Right.
And in sand casting, what you have to have is a predetermined form that, in order to make the mold, say you have a cone-shaped form and then goes into a box form. Okay, so you need to put rings around these pieces that you can then split apart. You ram sand into it, around it, that can be set either with resin or gas. And you take this out and separate it once everything is set, and you pull the wood out of it. Okay, well, that's what these forms are. They were for industrial iron castings. That eventually they would have a turn wheel for opening it, like on your water faucets. Okay, so Joe Cagle was the director at that time. Sarah knows much more about this process, how they came to come up with those forms, and with the Walworth Company. Apparently there was a call saying, we're going to take them to the dump. Do you want
They
them?
were going to be thrown away.
Yeah,
They had a contract with the government
yeah.
and were required to keep the forms for 50 years.
50 years.
And that term had run out, so they were going to throw them all away.
Just in case Saudi Arabia needed another.
Right.
And so the Waco Art Center had this big sale. They had like 5,000 patterns laying out on the asphalt.
I had no idea. I think the story was it was 4 boxcars that brought them all to that location.
Yeah. Anyway, you guys sold them at a very good price. Please come get them. Anyway, I took 15 or 20 of these things, mostly the bigger ones, and some of the smaller ones. And, created an exhibition of 5 or 6 pieces that I cut them up, I rearranged them, I used the hardware on them as elements, design elements, and I also painted them. In some instances as complex as that, and
The exhibition was called Altered States.
altered states.
And so he just repurposed these things into sculptures which were very different than any sculpture you made up to that point. Different from anything, I think, that's here.
I'm sure
They were truly unique at the time.
right. Well, there are 2 pieces back here that are actually dated 2015. My good sculptor friend, Butch Jack, they're much smaller, and they come apart.
These were like human scale.
Yeah, and then when I combined them, they got even bigger. But anyway, Butch Jack gave me these core boxes, which were, he figured I needed them. And, you know, I could see the trap. I could see the trap coming because, you know I'm going to use them. Okay, so these things are closed, but they're hollow inside. They may have some shape inside. Has to do with an industrial casting. So I ran them through the bandsaw line. Just do it. And then take, okay, what do we got here? And so 2 pieces back there will show you what we got out of them. They're also highly painted. But to get back to USC, okay, I was on scholarship when I went there, and Hal Gilbert, amazing man. And, we not only taught carving, but he wanted me to teach welding and foundry. I knew a bit about foundry, but I got the foundry class off the ground. I didn't know that much about welding, but it was part of this. Yeah, well, I taught myself to weld about a month before. It was oxygen, it's beer in the book will do it. And but when I got to Texas after getting my master's, I also worked for Carton Crates, which was a delivery service in LA, which was quite interesting. I did that for a year before I was trying to find a job. As you know, California, so I was in LA, and they have one disaster after another. They'll have a fire, then they'll get the earthquake, and then they'll get the rain, and everything floods. It goes downhill. We were going all over the place. Getting paintings out of bathtubs, and during the fires, and bringing them back to safe situations. We're also going into a lot of homes that were, sunny and shared, and a bunch of people. And we did a setup on their house. I'll tell this story. We went there twice, and they had all these books. And it was sunny and shared. So we went in and returned about 20 of them upside down to see if they were reading it. By the time we came out, of course, they weren't. But anyway, Tony Bennett, but anyway, that was a really interesting experience. But I did my thesis with a mix of carvings and weldings. But when I got back to Texas, it pretty much stayed welding. And I don't know if you remember the 76 was the big Galveston show, had a 30-foot piece in there. The piece that's now out at in Memorial Park, was built in, so when I came back, I just started working hard. And all throughout the 70s, we were just moving these big pieces around various locations for various events. And the monumental sculpture show that was on Kirby, and so.
And that was really that was the beginning of your public art.
Yes.
Sort of phase, which is still continues, basically.
Basically.
When asked, you'll do one.
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, that's how the piece at the airport
Right.
came about. I got the call from Debbie McNulty and said, "Do you want to do a piece for the airport?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll probably do that."
And it actually got moved. It was on the Esplanade, and then they.
We started out inside.
Okay.
Okay, and they were pairing the artists up. They were putting artists in pairs. And I was paired with Rolando Briseño in San Antonio. Rolando didn't own a grinder. He's a painter. And, he was painting kitchen tabletops with food on it. I'm mystified, so. And eventually, we split the commission. And, I said, Rolando, we worked on a basic design, but inside, which is basically what he's got in there now. It's fluorescent plexiglass coming through the skylight, throwing pattern on the floor. And I said, I want to go outside. Anyway, through 3 different stages, I won't go into them all, but it wound up at that.
The entrance to the parking garage.
Yeah. And there's a 40-foot piece.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I do all my own work. The only thing I farmed out on that piece, all the welding in there is mine. Just all the fabrication. It took me 6 months, but that was a 4-year project.
That's how long it takes you to get your money from the city, I know that. Because I was on the committee that selected that work, so.
Well,
the process is the process.
the process is the process. And you really want to set your throat. Okay.
Talk to Ed Wilson about it.
Yeah,
And
well,
you work in so many different media.
Now,
Which are you the most comfortable with?
carving.
What?
carving.
Carving?
It's the most challenging.
Doesn't matter what? Marble, wood,
Yeah. I mean, it's,
just as long as it's carving.
Frank Pusey's sort of my guy. Okay, a very spiritual man. His guru was Willour. I've used through the years. I'll appropriate, but I won't plagiarize. And that's virtually becoming indistinguishable. But I mean, when he polishes bronze as a head, that's sitting in the center of the room, all those images are being gathered into that one object. Okay? And that comes out of Willour. Okay? That spiritual essence.
Of all of the pieces that are in the show, there are very few carved pieces.
It's because we didn't select them. Well, we proposed a couple. They're still there for another time. In abundance, I might add.
That's a card.
That's carved.
Yeah, that's,
And there's one around the corner.
And
no,
there is a marble piece,
yeah,
a little marble piece in the back. It's carved.
right. And, yeah, that's a mesquite wood. And, actually came from a tree from my parents' house in San Antonio, along with some really, what, I love the wood. I mean, it's tough to carve. It's like carving a soft stone. What I like about carving, it has the commitment that you can't get away from. That you have to do. You take it away, you don't put it back. You know, so you got to deal.
Process of omission.
You know, and that's a really interesting process for me.
But then when you cast bronze, that's also, because you have to make the form that you're going to.
Yeah, but you can also cast a card. Bring Kusi again, and, which I've done.
That's what I'm saying. So you have to make the form. And
Yeah. Well, like this form here, this form is here is actually foam rubber. Okay, you know, the thick, squeezable.
I love to listen to Ben carve because there's a rhythm that sets in.
Well, it's a meditative thing. Welding, you got all this protective gear on.
it's hard to be
Yes,
spontaneous.
In a way, you know, you're grinding and you're throwing all sorts of toxic stuff all over the place. You're welding and you're basically going blind. You know, so yeah, I mean, and plus, carving, you don't need anything. You need a rock here. You need hand tools and a hammer. Okay, the electricity goes out, who cares? I mean, you know, it's there. And yeah, I've still got the one reason I toned that down when I came to Houston is that I wanted to establish an identity. And the one thing you can do with welding is you can create really quickly. A lot more quickly. If I take an 8-foot piece of stone, I might be on it 5 months. And okay, so you're doing 4 pieces a year. And, for me, even though it's preferable, I went large. So I was basically working life size.
Or larger.
Yeah, when I left
So
when
yeah,
I left
you're
LA,
bigger than life.
I got bigger than life. Yeah.
Because of the, obviously, the landscape, the
Yeah,
space,
right.
the sky.
Right, exactly.
Because all your things at that point were sort of pointing towards the sky or
Yeah.
referencing, leaving the ground.
Yeah.
They were about that movement upward rather than, except for that one section, around. They were all more like the one that was there, where this didn't have the curves,
Right.
so they were linear like the one above, behind. And so, and then there's a direct reference to the bottom part of this sculpture in the middle, the work that you were doing at that time.
No, it interested me. This is kind of my idea of the series. I mean, like that piece there was made for Navy Pier Walk in 2000.
But large.
Yeah, I built that piece large. It's about 28 feet across, and the tubes are 12 inches in diameter. And I actually patinaed those. We had to figure out the process of what it required in order to actually put a green patina on it. I keep it nitrate patina was I had to coat the tubes first, which were mild steel. I had to sandblast them and then coat them, powder coat them with copper.
Which you wouldn't even do 30 years ago. Nobody
Yeah.
did powder coating at that.
Well, there was
Very few.
there was Janie C. Lee had one show for Mark Pseudo. He had powder coated pieces. Okay.
That was probably the first.
And they were all
first
small.
Yeah.
And you powder coated baseball.
Yeah, now everybody.
Yeah. And the thing is that I only made one mistake on this maquette. Those are 2-inch tubes. Okay, like,
Bigger there.
they don't commercially make a 2-foot tube.
No,
I had to build it. You know, I had to build it.
that's what Tom Sayre found out early on.
Oh, you learned a lot real quick. You know, it's like, oh no. Did you?
So I'd like to ask if there are questions, because we've been rambling on here for a bit.
I mean, you know, you realize this could go on for about 5 hours.
But it ain't gonna do that.
So, but if you really want to narrow it, now's the time.
As I said, when I first started working with them, it was basically welded steel paint. And now, when I was researching my little forward to the catalog, in this show only, there are copper tubes, polished bronze, granite, limestone, marble, stainless steel, brass, exotic woods, and a lot of paint. So we've gone from just being welded metal and paint to almost every material the sculptor has used, or and plastic. I mean, I didn't even get into the plastic part of some of these. So basically, you've adapted your process to almost every process used by sculptors.
Anybody?
Well, I think.
Well, we can just chit chat and drink. That'll bring us up.
Now I think it's a good time for people to get around and look at the work and kind of figure out what we've been talking about for the last nearly an hour.